You may start anytime.
Perfect. Good. Yeah, welcome to the last technical session of CHESS 2020. We will hear 4 papers about fault attacks and countermeasures. The chairs for this session are Chao Lu, Adrien, and myself. Good. Then let's start with the first paper. It is titled Jackhammer, Efficient Row Hammer on Heterogeneous FPGA CPUs, and was written by Zane Weissman, Tore Thiemann, Daniel Mohimi, Evan Custodio, Thomas Eisenbart, and Berg Suna. And Zane and Tore will give the presentation.
All right, thanks for the introduction.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, cloud services have become essential to the way we use computers. What you might not know is that all of these cloud service providers now offer access to field programmable gate arrays, or FPGAs, to customers who might use them to accelerate tasks like cryptography, rendering, or machine learning. But in the age of Spectre and Meltdown, we know that hardware security is a major concern when multiple users share the same hardware on the cloud. So what does hardware sharing look like with a modern FPGA CPU system? We studied 2 similar FPGA platforms. On the one hand, we have the Intel Aria 10 Programmable Acceleration Card, or PAC for short, which you can see on the right. It comes as a PCIe expansion card. On the other hand, there's the integrated Aria 10 that resides in one package with the processor. Users can program the so-called green region. The non-user configurable blue region provides hardware interfaces between the FPGA and CPU. For the integrated FPGA, the blue region also holds a local cache. On the CPU, Intel provides a software stack to run the FPGAs. We're primarily concerned with attacks from these 2 FPGA platforms to their host CPU.
We started off by measuring access times to see if an attacker can distinguish different locations of a cache line when connected via UPI or PCI. To do so, we realized the timer on the FPGA by incrementing a register at every clock cycle. We used the timer to measure access times to addresses we placed in the FPGA cache, the last level cache, and main memory. As you can see in the histogram on the left, we have 2 distinct peaks for the 2 different locations accessible via PCIe. And on the right, you see 3 distinct peaks for the 3 locations reachable over UPI. Being able to differentiate between memory locations by timing DMA reads is a major step towards mounting cache attacks against the CPU. And since the interface does not offer a flush instruction, an FPGA attacker has to rely on eviction-based attack techniques. However, we found that DMA reads do not alter the location an address is cached at, so we focused on DMA writes. We found that they are placed in the last level cache because of the DDIO feature of the CPU, but DDIO limits our access to only 10% of the last level cache. Since this is not enough to mount a full cache attack against the CPU, we constructed a simple proof of concept covert channel instead. The channel reaches a throughput of 94.98 kilobits per second, and this can be improved by a factor of 6 if the FPGA doubled its sending speed and omitted the repetition encoding we used.
Jackhammer is our implementation of the rowhammer exploit that runs on Intel FPGAs and attacks the host system's main memory. In a rowhammer attack, an attacker repeatedly accesses certain memory addresses enough times between DRAM row refreshes for electromagnetic side effects to cause errors in memory that was not accessed during this time. So how does performance measure up to a CPU rowhammer attack on the same system? The figure on the left shows distributions of hammering rates, that is, the number of memory accesses per second sent by our jackhammer attack running on an Aria 10 PAC and running on its host CPU, an Ivy Bridge i7. The PAC achieves remarkably consistent memory throughput at nearly double the typical rate of the CPU. In the figure on the right, you can see how this translates to the rate of bit flips in the victim row. In many cases, jackhammer is able to flip 4 times as many bits per second as a CPU rowhammer attack on the same system. Rowhammer bit flips are caused by nonlinear electromagnetic effects, so it's not surprising that doubling the memory access rate more than doubles the flip rate. But how does the FPGA access the memory so much faster? In short, caching, or more precisely, not caching. When the FPGA reads memory, it does not place a new entry in the CPU's cache. The CPU, on the other hand, has to flush each address from its cache between memory accesses. We confirmed that with caching disabled on the CPU end, our jackhammer attack runs a little faster, but the CPU rowhammer runs much faster, almost catching up to jackhammer in speed. we constructed a Belcore fault injection attack against the RSA signature function in the Wolf Crypt library. In this attack, the victim first sets up an RSA key with Wolf Crypt, while the attacker allocates shared memory that the FPGA will use for the attack. The FPGA runs the attack by repeatedly accessing the main memory, flipping one of the bits in an intermediate value used in the RSA signature algorithm. This causes the signature itself to be faulty and also leak part of the RSA private key. In the best case, with the standard DRAM row refresh rate of 64 milliseconds, Jackhammer caused the fault an average of 25% faster than a CPU rowhammer attack. But with the most common defense against rowhammer attacks in place, that is, with the row refresh rate doubled, Jackhammer was 185% faster to cause a fault than the CPU.
So in conclusion, we identified and verified timing leakages in the Area 10 platform and constructed a covert channel from FPGA to CPU. We also showed that FPGAs can be used to accelerate rowhammer performance by 25% and used this to demonstrate a fault injection attack against the RSA implementation of Wolf SSL. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So there are currently no questions in Zulip, maybe in Zoom now, but I actually have some of my own. So you talked about this AFU, right? So what does this actually look like? I mean, do you just use some predefined components, or can you upload your own, I don't know, hardware design or something, your bitstream?
Zane, do you want to go for it?
So Intel provides a whole toolkit for designing your own hardware for this FPGA. So they specified the whole interface that's accessible to the FPGA. So it's almost like a hardware API. And so there's a couple of types of requests that can be sent and received to the CPU and to the main memory. So the FPGA can do direct memory access. So if the CPU sets up a certain page to be accessible by the FPGA, then the FPGA can access memory within that page using the physical address or the IO virtual address if you're using a virtual system. And then there's also memory mapped IO. So the CPU can configure a certain bit of memory on the software side to be mapped to the MMIO region of the FPGA, and then the FPGA can within the user configurable portion of the FPGA, you can control what MMIO reads and writes do.
Okay.
And then besides that, it's just an FPGA, and you can do whatever you want with it. And it has
can you do any
normal...
stupid stuff like this? Can you destroy it, like any short circuits or something like this, or is it prevented?
I don't. Well, so we looked for a few things to break. I mean, we mostly looked for parts of the interface to break. We didn't try to do a lot of hardware. We didn't try to break the hardware like that.
Okay.
You're saying. Yeah, I don't know.
But is there any chance to implement a countermeasure on this AVU level to prevent your attacks? I mean, I don't know, to filter the cache accesses or something from the AVU?
I guess from the perspective of, let's say that you're a cloud provider, right? And you want to allow users to program their own AFUs, right? It would be difficult because the way that it's so the way that the Intel toolkit is sort of set up right now is what the user provides is sort of everything in the configurable region, right? And the interface that the user interacts with is the non-programmable portion, right? What you could do is put countermeasures in the non-programmable region, but that would need to be done by Intel, right? Because those bit streams are then are signed by Intel and everything. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, thanks for your talk. I don't see any other questions. Maybe no, good. Then let's continue. Yeah, thanks Zane and Tore again for your presentation. The next paper is titled Protecting Against Statistical Ineffective Fault Attacks by Johan Dehmen, Christoph Dobraunik, Maria Eichsleder, Hannes Groß, Florian Mendel, and Robert Primas, who will also give the presentation. Robert?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah.
Just
but
have a
I don't
bit of
see any
difficulty sharing my screen because my browser says that it cannot access my shared screen. Let me just have a look here.
You may need to share. Oh, never mind.
Is that better?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay, thank you very much.
But maybe you can make it full screen. Does it work?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
So thanks for the introduction. As you mentioned, I will be talking about protecting against statistically ineffective fault attacks. So what are these attacks? Well, these statistically ineffective fault attacks, in short, SIFA, they were first presented at CHEST 2018. And they have a couple of interesting features. For example, they work pretty much out of the box against cryptographic constructions such as block ciphers and authenticated encryption schemes. Now, they can circumvent typically employed fault countermeasures, such as redundancy and infection, and they can do this by only requiring one fault injection per execution of the cipher. Now, in a follow-up in the same year at AsiaCrypt, it was shown that SIFA can not only circumvent fault countermeasures, but actually also masking schemes that are typically employed against power analysis and even higher order variants of masking or TI schemes. And at the time, we proposed countermeasures such as error correction, hiding, or self-destruction against this type of attack. Now, since then, many other people looked into how one could construct countermeasures against this type of attack. And most of them so far have utilized error correction. And this is totally fine, but it is also a little bit problematic because error correction per se is usually quite expensive, especially if you combine it with masking. And this also raises a couple of other questions. For example, it's not entirely clear how much error correction is actually required in practice to prevent SIFA, like in a real-world application. And there's also the open question about other fault attacks, like differential fault attacks. So what we do is we propose more efficient countermeasure strategies against this type of attack. And essentially what we do is we use a careful combination of typical redundancy with masking. And this in the end results in a very low overhead for lightweight schemes and let's say more moderate overhead for bulky schemes like AES. So there is not really a lot of time to explain how this attack works. So instead, I'll just present this very abstract evaluation setting that you can use to determine whether or not an implementation is protected against SIFA or not. So you will notice that we actually only have a look at the S-box implementation, a master S-box implementation. And the reason for that is that a SIFA attacker, when he injects a fault into the linear layer, so into a masked linear layer, this is actually not exploitable. So we only need to look at the S-box implementation. So here in this abstract setting, we have an RNG that generates a sample X that is uniformly distributed. And then we simply split this sample into multiple shares. We process it with our master S-box implementation. Afterwards, we combine the shares again, which gives us a sample Y, which is again uniformly distributed. Now, let's further assume we have some kind of redundant computation that just performs this S-box twice. And in the end, we check whether or not both computations match up. And if they do, we release the sample, so the Y. And so now we are only interested in the distribution of the correctly computed Y samples. And now the attacker comes in. And what we assume here is that he somehow disturbs the computation here within the master S-box. What is now bad is the case if now the distribution of the correct samples Y are somehow biased, because this essentially then means that one can mount SIFA to extract some key material. This would be the ideal case. So if you are protected against SIFA, then even if an attacker performs a fault injection here in the S-box, the distribution of the Ys that are correctly computed should still be uniform, and then this fault injection is not exploitable via SIFA. So let's have a look at a very simple example. So here we look at the 3-bit catch-check S-box, and let's just observe how this works. So let's assume in this masked S-box, we perform a fault injection here, such that we have a difference compared to the redundant computation. And we can see here that this difference propagates into 3 AND gates. So they are indicated here in blue. And these AND gates have as inputs the values B0, B1, and C1. And B0 and B1 correspond to the native value B, so the unmasked value B. And this is a problem because this means that this difference here can cancel out depending on the native value of B, which in return means then that if the computation is correct despite this fault injection, then the native value of B was 0, and this creates a bias that we can then exploit. So how could we fix this? In this very specific case of this simple S-box, it's actually just a matter of rearranging instructions. So here we have a very similar scenario as before, except now we have rearranged the instructions such that this fault actually propagates to the output, where it then gets eliminated by the detection countermeasure. And this is only possible for the smaller S-boxes. For larger ones, we need to follow a little bit a different strategy. Okay, so as mentioned, this approach is fairly efficient, especially for lightweight cryptographic schemes or S-boxes, for example, the 3-bit Ketchak S-box. But in the paper, we do a little bit more. We show that this approach is actually not only applicable to 3-bit S-boxes, but also for most 4-bit S-boxes. And we also, for example, show how you could implement the 5-bit Ketchak S-box or a FIN equivalent versions of this S-box in such a way that you can protect against SIFA attacks. Now, what about even larger S-boxes, like the one used in AES? Well, you can also protect this one against SIFA, but here you would need to use a kind of a different approach. So what we're essentially doing here is we are using a description of the AES S-box that is using smaller circuits or smaller computations that are all incomplete and there are permutations. And this, for example, means that we need to replace the F2 to the N multiplication that, for example, occurs in the can-write description of the AES S-box by large Toffoli gates. So a Toffoli gate is essentially the simplest invertible nonlinear function. And you need to do it. You need to do this, of course, in a way such that you, in the end, still end up with an AES S-box. Okay, so some final remarks here. In the paper, we give a complete description of such an AES S-box that is protected against a single fault SIFA. Now, I do mention single fault here because these presented strategies so far only protect against an attacker that only performs one fault injection. Now, for that reason, we also present an alternative countermeasure strategy that is using fine-grained redundancy checks. So we basically perform multiple comparisons within the S-box computation with the redundant computation. And this approach can be generalized in such a way that it can also prevent multi-fault SIFA. But in those cases, the overhead will be then quite significant. Now, I want to end this talk with a quick side note. You do not actually need necessarily algorithmic countermeasures against SIFA. So here I want to point out two authenticated encryption schemes. So that would be DryGuast and ISAP, both of which are currently competing in the second round of the NIST lightweight competition. And those two schemes can actually provide protection against SIFA purely on a mode level. So there you do not need to add any additional algorithmic countermeasures to cope with SIFA attacks. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you for your talk. The Zulip chat does not seem very active, so I will just have a quick question about your talk myself. Can you
Sure.
can you say a bit more about the multi-fault protection, and especially do you have some complexity measure of how your protection will impact the protection?
So if we consider multi-fault SIFA, then the complexity when we use these fine-grained redundancy checks roughly scales quadratically in the number of faults that we want to prevent. And how much this actually costs in the end very much also depends on the complexity of the S-box itself. So for example, for Ketchak, it will be still rather low, but for AES, it could be quite large. We do not have specific performance numbers for this multi-fault case. We only really describe how one could do it. So I cannot really give very precise numbers here, unfortunately.
Oops, sorry, I muted myself. Okay, thank you. Just a last question. For me, because I see Shivam has a question. If I don't,
Mhm.
Shivam asked, in multi-fault setting, are all faults considered ineffective?
Well, yeah, well, ineffective. So in the end, what you let me maybe go back a bit. So yes, so the physical effect is that you actually want to cause some difference, but the difference should cancel out based on the native value that is computed within the S-box. So, or in other words, based on all the shares of some native value that's used at the input. So you actually want, when it comes to the physical effect of the fault injection, you want to cause some kind of difference. So for example, if a wire or if a register is 0 and your fault sets this value to 0, then this is actually not exploitable. So this is quite different to the case where we consider unmasked ciphers. So this is the case that we consider in the very first version of the SIFA paper that we presented at CHES 2018. So when we consider masked implementation, we want actually to cause differences, actual differences in the computation.
Okay, thank you. I think we're past the time. Thank you again for the nice presentation. We will have the next talk now. So the next talk will be presented by Kirthi, and it's entitled FEDS, Comprehensive Fault Attacks Exploitability Detection for Software Implementations of Block Ciphers. So Kirthi, are you there?
I think you're still sharing, Robert, by the way.
It's okay. I think Kirthi is screen sharing. It's all black. Kirthi, we have some technical issue, I guess. We can see your screen.
There was a power cut here, so I won't be able to open the video. Hello.
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 Your audio is not working.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm a co-author of this FEDS paper. So Kirthi has a blackout in her place, so I could just make the presentation for her.
Okay.
So I'll just share my screen.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Chester.
Hello.
Kirthi?
Hello. Am I audible now?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Hello.
But we can see any screen.
Is my screen visible?
No.
Now.
Now maybe Chester, maybe you can try.
Yes, I will just present it. Wow. Just give me a minute. So perhaps you could just go with the next one. I wasn't ready for this, so I'll just come back in a minute.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll do that. We'll present the next talk and then we'll go back to yours.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, then. So next paper, the authors are 翻张、易燃张、回龙江、香珠、赤曼巴hin、新结兆、折流、大五谷 and 夔人. And the presenter will be Fan Zhang from Zhejiang University. Terry, you can take over.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Did you see the share?
Yeah, we can see your desktop.
Now it's fine, right?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay. So my name is Fan Zhang, coming from Zhejiang University, and this is a joint work with a lot of institutions, including the Nanyang Technology University. So the topic is a persistent fault attack in practice. PFA, persistent fault attack, is a new type of fault attack proposed in CHAIRS 2018. It can solve the problem of, I think, the synchronizations. Since the fault persists during the incursions, it can be injected before the incursion starts, and it doesn't require a precise timing synchronizations. A typical persistent fault for AES can be injected by modifying the S-box, and then the key can be easily recovered with some statistics analysis. So in that paper, the faults are injected into the S-box with a roll hammer on AES software implementations. However, at that moment, we didn't know whether such an analysis can be applied in a traditional fault attack scenario, such as laser injections. So in this paper, we conducted a persistent fault attack on an 8 meg microcontroller, a very typical target of classical fault attacks. To make the attack more practical and much easier, we improve our method in several ways. First, we utilize the MLE, maximum likelihood estimations, to reduce the number of ciphertexts that is required. Second, we propose a method to verify whether the desired persistent fault is injected. And third, we improve the analysis techniques to handle the cases when the fault in an S-box is unknown. Along with these improvements, we actually extend PFA to the lightweight block cipher present. And finally, our attack is verified through a laser-based fault attack. So let us start with a brief introduction to the original PFA. So the core idea is that the previous tightly coupled fault injection stage is now partitioned into two stages: the loose coupled fault injection stage and the subsequent incursion stage. So in total, we have 3 stages. The interesting part of PFA is that the fault is persistent in the S-box. However, the faulty element of the S-box may not be accessed. Some ciphertexts are correct, some are incorrect. So how do we do the simple persistent fault analysis? Suppose the correct element is V. So after injection, the value becomes V star, so which is erroneous. For a specific cipher text byte, V star will appear twice, and you will never see the original V. So the distribution of the values is now becoming biased. So V star is with a probability of 2 over 256, and V is with a probability of 0. So the adversary can easily exploit these 3 types of fault leakages, and for the 0 probability and for the maximum probability, he can directly know the key. For other cases, he can just get some like impossible values and then reduce the key search space. So in the for the original attack, we assume the values of V and V star are known to the adversary. However, in a real attack, it's difficult for the adversary to know these parameters, like which element of the S-box is corrupted and how it is changed. Therefore, before conducting a typical PFA, he has to recover these unknown parameters first. In addition, the adversary may try for several times to inject a desired fault into the device. So he needs to know whether the fault is really injected or not. So for the first problem, we use the maximum likelihood estimations, ME in short. So ME is a method of giving observations. So in our context, the parameter to be estimated is the fault value or others, and the giving observation is our correct ciphertext. And the estimation can be performed with those equations at the bottom of this slide. And the second problem is how to identify effective injections. So for AES, the S-box is accessed 160 times during the whole encryption. With a 40 S-box, the probability for a ciphertext become 40 is calculated to be around 53%. So that means in our injection, if our injection is effective, then about half of the ciphertext can become 40. So this is roughly the ratio. So we test our attack with a laser injection attack, and the victim device is an 8 meg microcontroller. So it's kept at the backside and allows the laser to be injected. And we use a high resolution camera to take a photo first for the more details inside. So the main components are labeled in this figure, and we can see the I/O, the flash, and the logic. So one of the major contributions of this paper is that we identify that the target of PFA could be the SRAM, and we put this point into the practice. So we set up the whole system and shoot the laser into the S-box, which is loaded from the flash when the microcontroller powers on. So in conclusion, so in this paper, we improved the PFA to make it more efficient and practical. It requires 28%, ciphertext less than the original PFA, and it can utilize an unknown fault in the S-box. To demonstrate our attack is quite general, we extend the PFA to the present cipher. Finally, we test our attacks with practical laser injections and found some interesting characteristics of the SRAM. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks for the talk. While we are still waiting for the questions from Tulip. Okay, there's a question from Victor Arribas. Could we launch this attack on a hardware implementation in ASIC or FPGA? What would be the challenges?
I think in this paper, we mainly discussed in the software mainly for the software implementation. Actually, in the original paper, just 2018, we do talk about the target when it is a hardware implementation. So in that case, we targeted on the BRAM implementation of AES. So that could be possible, yeah.
Okay, and I have a question. Does this attack also work on GIFT?
The cipher?
Yes, the cipher GIFT.
Not sure. We extended this one to present first. Later we do the LED, and also we do the later one is called. We tried the three ciphers already, and there's a GIFT we are not sure, not familiar with.
Oh, okay, thanks. I think we can go to the next speaker maybe. Thanks for the talk.
Thank you.
So
Chester, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, sorry about the delay. I'm Chester Ribeiro. Unfortunately, Kirti, who is a PhD student, could not be here. She is the first author and was supposed to present. This work is also jointly done with Indrani Roy, Aritra Hazra, and Swarup Punia. So this work is about creating an automated tool for detecting fault attacks in software implementations of block ciphers. So we all know that when we talk about fault attacks, especially on ciphers, the one critical point is to identify where the fault should be injected. And for a long time, this was actually done manually, right? So in fact, for maybe the early decade, the last decade, there were like improved techniques to actually identify where in the fault, where in the cipher the fault should be injected, right? So more recently, roughly around 2015 or so, there have been automated tools that were actually developed to identify these sweet locations in the cipher where the fault should be injected, right? So these tools, one of the first tools were XFC, EXP fault, and AFA. These tools essentially looked at the algorithm. They would take an algorithm as an input. The algorithm was represented as in a high-level abstract perspective, and it would output the locations or the operations which are actually vulnerable. So just to give you the other alternative, again, a parallel work was these three: Data C, TADA, and ADFA. So these three works, I think some of them were in chess a couple of years. They looked at the software implementations of the ciphers and then identified specific instructions that were actually vulnerable to fault attacks. So these two were two parallel approaches, and each of them had their own benefits. So the high-level implementations, the high-level techniques, the XFC, EXP fault, and the AFA, essentially, since they worked at the algorithmic level, they could essentially take care of sophisticated cryptographic operations like differential characteristics of S boxes and so on, right? However, the limitation was that since it's algorithmic level, there could be various ways to implement a cipher, and these cannot be directly applied to the implementation. On the other hand, the implementation level techniques, essentially, since they worked on the assembly or at something like the compiler intermediate representation, it was pretty complex, and they could not essentially take care of the cipher properties. So this is where we essentially came in. So what we did was we were able to actually make use of a high-level tool, which we call as HLE, to actually identify vulnerabilities in software implementations. Now, the interesting thing was that this could be actually done for any form of implementation. So for example, if we just take this cipher, this toy cipher like this cipher could be implemented in multiple different ways. So like, for example, these are three implementations, one in bit sliced implementation, 1 and 2 are relatively straightforward, and implementation 3 actually used the T tables, right? So the vulnerable locations in each of this is actually different. So what FEDS actually does at a very high level is kind of bridge the gap between these high level tools for fault automation and the low level software implementations. So the good points are that it actually works at the source code level. It can use the cryptographic properties of Cipher, unlike the regular ILE tools, and can also cater to a large number of software implementations for a given Cipher. So the essential idea is to actually find a mapping between an algorithmic level specification, which we call as BCS, which stands for block cipher specification, and a C-level implementation. So for example, over here, we have a language which looks something like HTML and implementation 1, right, for that toy cipher. So here we see that there is a one-to-one map, and finding a mapping is relatively simple. But things get complicated when you actually change the implementation. So for example, here, it gets a little more tricky because you see that one operation over here, the lookup for key 0 is actually implemented second, while A2, that is the second key lookup, is implemented first. Now it could also get more tricky like this when you go to T tables or bit sliced implementations. And eventually what we have is several different mappings that are possible: one to one, one to many, many to one, and many to many. So the idea what FEDS does is essentially it is able to essentially do this particular mapping automatically by a technique known as by a tool which we by a model checking tool which we implement as part of this fault mapping module. So this is how the entire framework works. So we have a high level specification of the cipher. This is in the HTML like language. We pass it through this high level tool, which can then use cryptographic properties of the cipher, algebraic properties, or differential properties, impossible differential properties, and so on, and give you an output which where the vulnerable operations are marked. Sorry, are marked. So this is then fed into this fault mapping module, which then takes the source code and maps this faults at the from the high level onto the source code. So the output of this fault mapping is essentially the source code with the instructions which are actually vulnerable marked. Right. So at the end of it, we do some further evaluation to eventually get a list of instructions at the low level, which are vulnerable to these to the specific fault attack. So we've tried this on different high level tools, including which could cater to differential fault attacks, impossible differential fault attacks, and so on. And the interesting thing is this high level tool is kind of not directly connected. As long as we have a representation which is understood by the tool, the BCS format, you can actually plug in any form of any tool to get the corresponding software vulnerable locations. So we tried this, for instance, on 6 different implementations of AES, including 2 T tables. There is also a bit-slice implementation, which is not shown, and others are relatively straightforward. So it just shows one round of the AES implementation with different ways of you could actually implement the same thing. And this is something about what we see in the mapping. So here we have the sub operations in the BCS at the high level aspect, and on the y-axis the corresponding program expression. So here you actually see the mapping between the high level to the low level, so which the tool actually provides. So this tool can be used, and what we show in the paper is that this tool can be used for many things. It could be used to evaluate specific memory locations in the software which are vulnerable. It can also be used to design a compiler which can automatically insert countermeasures while compiling the program, and so on. So I would stop over here, and the tool is made open source. The link is provided in the paper, and I would like you to refer you to the main paper and the full presentation for more details about this work.
Thanks for the presentation. I have one question. Does FEDS work on protected implementations?
That's a good question. So as of now, FEDS does not work on a protected implementation. So in fact, it will fail miserably in the current state for protected implementations where a countermeasure is present. So that is part of our future work.
Oh, okay, I see. Thanks. Oh, there's a question from Shivam Bahin. Does it work with non-SPN ciphers?
Yes, in fact, I have the results in the paper. So we've been able to do this with ciphers like Camellia, Clayfia, and a few more things. So it would work with any cipher. So as it's kind of independent of the cipher, it depends if the HLE tool, the high level tool, actually supports automated analysis, then it can directly be used. So we are kind of independent of the structure of the cipher.
Oh, okay, thanks. I think we are quite late with the timing. If anyone has more questions, please email the presenters, or you can post the questions in Zulip. And we would like to thank the speakers for their presentations again. And we also thank everyone for joining the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall I continue with the closing remarks?
Okay, should we stay in the same Zoom room or should we change rooms for the closing remarks?
Yes, we will stay in the same room, so you can just go ahead whenever you're ready.
But then wait a moment, because there's a separate link in the program. So I was also about to leave this meeting and try to join the other one. So there may be a bunch of people who's exactly doing that.
Ah.
Benedict, I think the link is the same.
Yeah, but people will only realize that once they have left this meeting and joined the same meeting again, right? So if you start now. Yeah, okay. Elena also confirms the link comes back to the same place, but it will still take a minute for people to walk that route, right? Or we do it now very quickly, and when they come back, everything is done.
Okay, so shall I wait a bit?
Chichanok, are you sharing? Yes, I think your chat. We are seeing your chat screen.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Is it better?
Yeah. Perfect.
So shall I wait a bit, or shall I go ahead?
Let's wait one more minute.
Okay.
If everybody agrees.
We're 106 now. If we're still 106 in a minute, we start. That means everyone's here. Okay, count is actually dropping, so let's just start.
Okay. Okay, thank you everyone. We hope you have enjoyed the conference. In the opening remarks, we reported that there were about 500 participants. More registrations trickling during the week, with the last registrant joining less than an hour ago. We now have 607 registrants, making this the largest chess ever. The previous record was Amsterdam in 2018 with 606 registrants. Those of you who want the t-shirts should have received an email from us. We will send the t-shirt to you after the conference. We would like to once again thank our generous sponsors for supporting this Virtual Chess 2020. Thank you very much, our gold sponsors, Qualcomm, New AE, and Rambus. Thank you also our silver sponsors, Crypto Experts, NXP, PQ Shield, OSR, WizQ, and eChart. One final remark from the General Chair. Tonight is the start of a New Year Jewish year. We wish a Happy New Year to all. I'll hand it over to the Program Chair.
Mehdi, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, so we said pretty much everything, I think, in the room session, but I'd like to reiterate our thanks to all participants, to all the speakers, to the general chairs who took on the responsibility, on very short notice, especially to Kevin and Kay, without whom this would not have been possible. And yeah, in general, I think we had a successful event, and I'd like to we'd like to see everyone in person next year, hopefully. See you soon.
Benedict, go ahead. I think everything is said by Mehdi. I don't have any other word to say.
Well, I think so too. Everybody thanked everybody. It was, I think everything went really good, and everything was very well done. So thanks everybody who was involved in organizing this and making this happening. Thanks also, of course, to the many authors. Like, if you wouldn't write the papers, then there would be no reason to have chess in the first place. And basically, before we close the conference, I just wanted to basically deliver a message from the organizers, hopefully from next year. So the plan currently is, wait, I have to move your window out of the way, otherwise I cannot put this into full screen. That's full screen, right? So the plan currently is that basically the entire schedule is pushed back by 1 year, and we'll have next year's chess conference in Beijing as it was planned for this year. You see, I recycled the photograph they had in their proposal for last year. I didn't make them make a new one. So, so if that really happens, chess will be on September 12 to 15 in Beijing in China, with the general co-chairs Li Jihu, Wikeng Bai, Zhiliu, and Junpeng Fan, and the program co-chairs Elke de Mulder and Peter Schwabe. And I assume all of us hope very much that that's going to be the case. However, there is always our dear little friend going around in the background, and so there's an alternative that we just all meet each other back again here. That may, of course, happen, or in a similar format. It's currently absolutely impossible to predict what's going to happen globally and also individually. Like it's sufficient if a single country just says we don't allow international travel, or people need to quarantine themselves when they enter the country. That would already basically block everything. So it's going to be one of the two, I guess. And which one's going to be, we'll announce it, I guess, early next year. So we can do that again, that everybody unmutes themselves and just gives a warm round of applause to everybody who has been involved in this. Thank you very much. See you at the social party.
Yes, we'll see you all at the after.